What's going on, Force of Will players? Ryan Miles here from On Hill Gaming, here with episode 2 of my Force of Will daily series. This one's going to be about the concept of a healthy format, mostly just going through some nostalgia and thinking about the last time that we had what I would call a healthy format in Force of Will, right? So for me personally, the last time that I think it was really fun to build decks in this game was back when Legacy Lost was released. So if you remember when Legacy Lost came out, it was I think December of 2016, right before the ARG Nationals. And that was when Fox came out. Everyone knows that Legacy Lost is like the set where Fox came out. And you might be thinking, well, if that's the set where Fox came out, isn't that when the game went to shit? Well, actually, after the Nationals tournament, and after we saw the Grand Prix results from Japan, where they were playing the Lumia Hook deck, the next tournament, the very first GP of the 2017 season, was a very diverse spread of decks. You had a Lumia Hook was competitively viable. You had Fox was competitively viable. You had Valentina 2.0, and then the deck that actually won the event was Turbo Feasting. So you had not only 4 different decks that were all competitively good, they were all topping events, but you also had other decks that were countering these decks that didn't end up making the top 8 just because they weren't represented enough numbers. You know, you still had Dark Alice floating around. You had like black blazer control that existed that was actually terrifying if you were playing Lumia Hook. It was something that Jean-Paul played in an online tournament, and it was absolutely bonkers obnoxious. It was like designed to counter Fox, but it also countered Valentina 2, and then it had enough control cards to beat Lumia Hook, and it played basic stones so you couldn't hook them, but it was pretty weak to Feasting. But you had like the ability to build these cool fun decks to counter specific parts of the meta, and then nothing was so innately powerful that there weren't counters that existed, right? So if you knew that you had a weak Valentina 2.0 matchup, you could side in Death Scythe, you could side in Barrier of Shadows, you could side in, you know, Black Moonbeam, I think still exists. Yeah, Black Moonbeam was still around. You could side in these cards that would help counter your worst matchups to be able to beat them. Even though like a control deck usually would still lose to Valentina 2, you had a chance, right? If you really wanted to be Quiber, you had Gale Force had just been printed, so you had Gale Force available. You knew that, you know, Barrier of Shadows was still good to stop Apollos. You knew inherently that Guinevere had to die to stop the deck. Like, you had very clear win conditions to beat those decks. Lumia Hook, same thing. Kill the Sacred Elf, make sure that you prison the Captain Hook, or you Seal of Wind and Light the Captain Hook, stuff like that. Fox, kill the little guys. We didn't have Demonic Dead, so you could actually consistently kill Fox's Resonators, and they wouldn't be able to use Fox effect. It was a great format, in my opinion. A lot of people say they don't like open formats, but I think that that one was one where you could really play what you wanted to, and if you knew what you were doing and you knew what you had to beat, you were going to have a good time. And I love formats where you're able to deck build. And I think that's something we haven't had in Force of Will for, like I said, almost a year now, or even more than a year. Because after LEL, we had RDE, and then we had Prisia. And it's like, okay, what kind of Prisia deck do you want to play? Do you want to play Spinning Myths? Do you want to play Jack and the Giants, which was much less popular, but I think was absolutely fun and fine to play? Like, you had some people try and play Fox, but really it wasn't good against Spinning Myths Prisia. And then you had, you know, control decks that weren't very good against Jack Prisia and still lost to Prisia because she would just kill you on turn 2, right? Like, there was nothing you could really do that was better than playing some Prisia variant and then having the ability to kill people on turn 2. So that wasn't a very fun format. After that was whatever the last name of the set was, and Tree 2 came out, and then you had, oh, okay, you can play Prisia, or you can play Fox, or you can play Tree 2, or like you can play like the blue-black Lumia deck that was kind of chilling around. Like Alex won Nationals. Alex played and won Nationals with it in the summer. But really it was still like those decks were just so much more powerful than anything else that you could do, that even though we had a 5-deck format in LEL, you still had fringe decks that could match the power level of those decks. But once you have Prisia and Fox, it's no longer a 4-deck format because like the meta is so diverse. It's just these are the only cards that exist that do things at this level of degeneracy. And then Tree 2 was able to exist strictly because it had a good matchup against Prisia, and it could also have a good matchup against Fox. Like, it could like play cards and have a high enough life total to beat both of those things. So it was kind of just the anti-meta. And then the blue-black Lumia deck just had an insanely good Fox matchup, and then could side into a good Prisia matchup. But Prisia really wasn't seeing as much play because Leviathan got banned, right? I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Leviathan got banned. Sorry about that. But yeah, so Prisia was still like really good, but not as good in the context of a full, you know, Alice cluster empowered Tree and Fox. But then Atlas Cluster rotated, and you thought that, okay, well, now we're going to get some cool new stuff from the Rhea cluster. We're going to lose a lot of dumb cards. All the Regalia are gone now. You know, Prissy's not going to do as much damage. All of the, like, Fox loses, like, Orb or something. I don't even remember I don't think Fox lost anything, but it still had Demonic Dead, and that's all that mattered, right? So as soon as we get the Rhea set, the green decks get Faeya's Spell, and between having Faeya's Spell and Severing Winds, you just can't do anything, right? You can beat Fox if you really, really try, and you can beat Prisia if you really, really try, but there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the game that can maintain a good enough matchup against both of them that it feels good to take it to a tournament. And we saw that at Worlds, the top 8 was all Fox, Prisia, I'm sorry, at Masters, it was all Fox, all Prisia, and one Gil 2, and it was Alex Blandon once again piloting the Gil 2 deck, and he thought he had a winnable Prisia matchup, but really he didn't. Like, he thought he had a cool sideboard that could beat Prisia, and we watched him get smashed on stream in top 8. And then at Worlds, the top 8, of course, was all Fox and Prisia, and the Fox decks were, like, so confident in their ability to beat Prisia no matter what, that they were just, like, main decking Bluestones, specifically so they could just have better Fox matchups and then still beat Prisia. And that's just kind of, like, we didn't really have any opportunity to build decks, right? So then we get the European ban list. We get Griffin's gone, which I don't like, but I talked about it yesterday. Prisia is gone, and Captain Hook is gone, which they kind of jumped the gun on, but now you can't play Lumia Hook, so sure, okay. And what happens? We have Fair is just an unanswerable card, and was for a full 2 sets before they finally printed Last Days. And like I said, Last Days has its own problems where actually I didn't say this, sorry. Last Days has its own problems where it not only is really good against Fair, and that's good, but it's also like too good against Shayla and Rhea, and now those rules can't be played. But I'll get into that in a second. So when Fair came out, the very first set, ACN, Ancient Knights, ADK, ACN. So when ACN came out, it was Red Fair was like the deck, and you had Alhamat, and you had like maybe you had Tree 2, you had some other stuff, but the problem with Fair was that there was no interacting with it, right? We had just lost Black Moonbeam. The guy comes in, he's an 18-20 if he wants to attack you. Mariabella is a very good card. You can play Alhamat's Black Lightning, and that's why Alhamat was kind of good, and why Tree was kind of good because the black deck, but ultimately, like, the deck just put out a lot of pressure. Sacred Elf had, like, no answers. Fiery Fox was making them draw a bunch of cards as an aggro deck. But like inherently, Fair just like got these counters when he flipped for 3 mana, and he got to put a guy into the field. And if you wanted to stop them from putting a guy in the field, the only thing you could do was play Dawn of the Earth. So now you're paying 2 mana to stop their 3 mana flip. Oh, but by the way, if they have Fair spell, like you're just getting out tempoed anyway. It was just, you could build a deck to beat Fair, but their answers to your answers were more efficient than your answers. So it felt really bad trying to do that. So that wasn't really a fun format either. And again, it's just because the power level of the cards that were at the top of the format were just too strong compared to anything else you wanted to do. Lumia couldn't really exist because you couldn't answer Fair. You couldn't answer Fair spell. You couldn't, like, if you had an answer to Fair, like, they could just wait to flip and be an aggro deck, and you had to answer their aggro creatures, and then they would flip their ruler, and then if you're answering their aggro creatures, you're tapping out too much kind of stuff. So after that, we got ADK, and that was when Lumia Command, Green Black Fair. I had a lot more hopes for Lumia Command in that format because I thought that Otherworld Dream Severing Winds was just completely dumb, and then like the best deck should just be the deck that draws the most cards and makes the most mana. So that's okay. Lumia makes mana by flickering Sacred Elf. Lumia draws cards by playing a Lumia that draws 3 cards. But no, the best deck in that format was still Black-Green Fair because we still had no answer to Fair. We have nothing that says, okay, they flipped their ruler and they got a 20-20, like, what is it, an 18-20 just by himself if he wants to be hitting you with. But the fact that he has a versatility of giving guys barrier, making guys bigger, like, you just can't answer it, and it's just so much tempo all at once. And there was nothing. You couldn't, like, if you final battled it, you're paying 40 life to get rid of it. It's just, there was nothing you could do that was efficient enough. And you could, oh my god, don't even think about trying to final battle for like 3 stones and then 40 life, because if the Otherworld Dreams you and it's like, oh, I'm gonna cry, that's all you're gonna do. So it was just such a frustrating thing to try and beat, because even though I thought I had this concept of what the best deck should be, I was just getting beat by this like degenerate tempo deck that played a bunch of 1-cost cards and cancel spells, and then said, I'm gonna flip my ruler, I'm gonna get an Oberon or a Commander to the crowd, and I'm gonna dome you for 20, and then I'm gonna dome you for 20. I'm sorry, I'm gonna dome you for 20. I'm gonna final battle your board that you put up to block, and then I'm gonna dome you for 20, and the game's gonna be over. And that's just no fun to try and build in. So then now we have Scheherazade. They actually banned Otherworld Dream so that it was harder to just play blanket degenerate cancel spell deck. So I think Lumia became a lot less powerful because of that. They printed Powerless Dragonoid, so Fayer become a lot less popular because of that, and they printed Scheherazade, and then Scheherazade gets to play Powerless Dragonoid and hose everything, right? Like, any fun ruler, any of the Raya cluster rulers, like, cannot have an above average time because Sherry has immediate access to last days of the Powerless Dragonoid. I think that Raya is actually approaching a very playable power level. You start the game with 3 mystery counters, you've got cards, you've got a Dark Knight Butterfly, says your opponent discards 2 cards. It's a 1-mana Lapis Storm, right? It's a great card against control decks, mediocre against aggro decks, but you've got other tools against aggro decks, right? You've got Sword of the Night Butterfly. It's a 1-mana quick cast card that you can awaken it for a mystery counter to kill a 4-drop. Like, 1-mana kill a 4-drop is really, really good. It is insane that that card is not playable just because Raya is not playable. Like, you cannot reliably hang on to your mystery counters long enough because they're so hard to generate, right? Like, what are your options for generating mystery counters? You've got a 5-drop Dinosaur. Like, okay, if you can resolve a 5-mana card at sorcery speed, like, you've got it, but like, you're just not living that long against Kirik, and you're not even living that long against Scheherazade because they just play a 10-10 on turn 2. They're banishing your board and discarding your hand on turn 3. It's just too much going on there. And they also have like Vanish and stuff like that, right? But yeah, so you've got the Dinosaur, you've got, I think there's a 4-mana removal spell that generates a mystery counter. There's a 2-mana 6/6 that when it dies generates a mystery counter. Like, that's not playable. And then you have a mono Blackstone. Like, I'm sure there's another one. I think there's a 1-mana card that just says make 2 mystery counters, but like, if you're using a card to make mystery counters, you're no longer like doing kind of like broken things. And also, if you do make 2 mystery counters, again, they can just 1-for-1 on that card by using Last Days of the Powerless Dragonoid. So the fact that the mystery counters are so vulnerable really makes Raya just not a viable option, unfortunately. Shayla, I haven't messed around with too much yet, but I think like this was the set. Looking at all the spoilers up until this point, you're like, wow, Shayla's going to be really, really good, right? Like, there's the Thunderstorm mechanic seems really cool. Her ruler side seems like it's really easy to make Thunderstorm, so that's going to be exciting. But yeah, you just can't even do anything because as soon as you try and flip your ruler, they just remove all your counters. And then, I forgot about the other offender, but we'll get there. They remove all your counters, and then you can't, like they can just remove your counters anytime you want to make things Thunderstorm, and you can't get Thunderstorm as often as you need it. But also, the Kirik and Shayla, Kirik doesn't care about this as much, but Shayla cares about it a lot. The fact that Lorite exists, and this happens for the structure deck ruler, Gil. Like, there's a potential, like, Gil control, the structure deck Gil, like the Gil Alhamat 4.0 or whatever the heck he's called. He could have been a really cool ruler, but they printed Lorite, right? So you can't rely on his God Art to clear the board for you. You can't rely on him to be your reset button to play this historical control deck or this historical fog deck. And same thing with Shayla, you never get access to her God's Art because of the Lorite. Like, you cannot, it's too, I don't think it's his God Art, I think it's his enter ability, but I'm sorry. Like, Lorite's just keeping these fun rulers kind of out of the meta, right? I don't think Lorite's an inherently problematic card overall, and I think it's a really good thing that that card exists, like in the Wanderer format. But when the only, like, semi-playable rulers that we have that are close to good and competing with the top decks in New Frontiers are just being shut down by a small handful of cards that just hose them so completely and are so good that, like, so in Lorite's case, right, like, it's okay for almost any deck to run 2 to 4 Lorite just because that card's so good against everything. So there's no, like, it's not, like, for example, in the other format, right, when you wanted to beat Val 2, you had Barrier of Shadows, you had Death Scythe, you had Black Moonbeam, but you don't need to main deck 4 of each of these cards. In fact, you're not. You're just, like, you're sideboarding them. Maybe you're main decking a Black Moonbeam. If you're playing Ruler's Memoria, maybe you're playing Death Scythe. Like, you're probably not main decking Barrier Shadows because the only deck that really cares about additions is Val. And I guess Feasting to an extent, right? Like, they like to use Artemis or Apollo to like recycle Guinevere's and make sure that removal can't hit them. Whatever. It's like maybe you main deck the Barrier Shadows, maybe you main deck a Black Moonbeam, probably didn't, like maybe you main deck Death Scythe, but it's like one of each at most, right? But now I can just play 4 Lorite and just be like, oh, I'm playing these 4 Lorite to beat, you know, anything, and now that I see what your ruler is, I'm going to hang on to them until I can just negate it. So from the outset, when it comes to deck building, you look at these rulers that have appropriate power levels, right? Shayla has a pretty high power level. Rhea has a pretty high power level in a vacuum, right? Compare those rulers to like Flute, right? Adelbear, Charlotte. Like those are just not strong rulers. Well, Charlotte kind of is, but Charlotte suffers from the same problem where you go, man, I've got 0 cards in hand. I would like to flip and draw 5 cards. And they go Lorite, and you're like, I'm a fucking doofus. Like, it just feels so bad to try and build anything like that. Like, you just, the idea gets thrown out the window immediately. So you don't have a lot of fun deck building options. It's really just, why would I play anything else besides Scheherazade or Kirik? Because they just have the most consistent lines of plays on the first 2 turns, and they're so hard to disrupt efficiently. Like, okay, yeah, you can play Shackles of Ice against Scheherazade, but that's literally it. Not only do they main deck an answer to Shackles of Ice, but if you're main decking Shackles of Ice and you run into a matchup where the Shackles of Ice is not useful, it's just a dead card. Like if you have a main board Shackles of Ice and you draw it in your opening 5 and your opponent's deck is Lumia, you're just like, this isn't going to do anything this whole game. So you never get to main deck more than 1, because then like when you do run into those bad matchups, you end up, like, let's say you go to a GP and you're main decking 3 Shackles of Ice, right? And then in round 1 you play against Lumia. You open your 5, you open 2 Shackles of Ice. You're playing with a 3-card hand from turn 1, and you just get clapped by Sacred Elf, Lumia, Rachel, nonsense. Okay, you lose. Now you're in the 0-1 bracket. Well, all the Scheherazade decks just went into the 1-0 bracket because it's a good deck, and you're trapped under the bus for the rest of the tournament. You're killing your chances of topping. Like, sometimes it works out, but like if you're playing a numbers game and playing the law of averages, it's just not a super safe idea to try and do something like that. So those cards go in your sideboard, but then you're taking the lost game 1, and it's just like, what? It's like, why would you play a deck where you know that you have counters to the top decks, but they're not accessible until you get into the sideboard, and then you're basically not able to win game 1 because of the consistency of how fast Kirik kills you, because of the consistency of how quickly Scheherazade locks down the game, that kind of stuff. So there's just no real viable reason to play any other deck, even if you did think you had like a good like way to beat them out of board or something like that. So I don't think that we have good deck building options right now because of these reasons. And I would like to see cards like Lorite get banned. I would like to see cards like Last Days of Powerless Dragonoid. Like, I think that's an actually problematic card. I think that like the other rulers could see a lot of play if that card wasn't available. And maybe that just means banning Scheherazade, right? Because if you ban Scheherazade, then that means that you can play in a tournament where 40% of the decks in a tournament aren't just main decking that card and have access to it on turn 1, which is a huge problem. Like, if I'm playing in a tournament without Scheherazade and Last Days of Powerless Dragonoid still exists, that means that the decks have to draw it. Like, they have to, it's the same thing as Shackles of Ice, right? Like, do you main deck Last Days of Powerless Dragonoid in a tournament where you're not sure what the meta is? Because that's another card that's dead against Lumia. Lumia is still a pretty, like I said, tier 1.5 deck. Ayu is a tier 1.5 deck. You don't want to draw Last Days of Powerless Dragonoid against Ayu. So, like, if Sherry's gone, then like maybe that card's okay. But I think that's the card that's making Sherry keep these other rogue decks out of the meta. So yeah, I think like Lorite's a problem for rogue decks. I think that Sherry in general is a problem. Like the ruler was designed to beat everything. Like, it's like you get a card that says remove counters, counter red spell. You get a card that says no weather. You get a card that says kill a white guy, and then your opponent banishes a gem. But they just kind of overdid it. So I think that that's why the decks are being kept down. So if we want to see a fair format, we need to see the decks like Shayla and Rhea be able to have room to breathe. And I think that, like I said, those are the 2 main defenders. So that's my thoughts on what a healthy format would look like, the last time we had one. Sorry for rambling once again, guys, but this has been your Force Build Daily. And if you have any suggestions for me, please let me know on social media. So thanks for watching, everyone, and hope you have a good time.